Hello and welcome, my name is Will, and in today's tutorial we're going to have a look at some rusty painting techniques on this Refinery model. This is more of a showcase of different methods, but you can choose any or all of these to apply to your models. So let's get started. I went ahead with an airbrush and base coated in a very light grey, almost white colour. I recommend a light base colour for these methods that we're doing today. I then started on the main colour of the Refinery, which was going to be Jacaro Orange from Games Workshop. We're going to be applying two thin coats to get a nice even covering, and I'm going to paint this all over the main part of the model. Here we go with the second coat of orange. You see how it's a much stronger, nice smooth colour there. Next up, I wanted to use the Games Workshop colour XV88 as it's a shade darker than Jacaro Orange, but I didn't have it to hand, so I mixed in a little bit of light brown, then added a few drops of dark brown ink until I was happy with the shade. To apply this colour, you want to get a bit of foam or a sponge and a piece of paper. Tear a small chunk out of the foam and rough up the edges. This will give a random stippling texture when we apply the paint. We're going to apply this all over the orange base colour. Next we can use the same technique, this time with Rhinox Hide from Games Workshop. I thinned it out on a palette before dabbing off the excess on the paper before applying. You can use tweezers to hold the sponge if you like, but I was finding it difficult on the rounded sides of this model, so I held the sponge in my fingers in the end to get a better coverage. We're looking for a fairly heavy covering in this step. To get into the harder to reach areas on the model, I used an old brush with stiff bristles. I put a little paint on the brush, then dabbed most of it off on the paper and stippled in the spots I couldn't get to with the sponge. In the next step, I wanted to add some remnant of the colour the Refinery tanks used to be painted in. I picked a neutral light grey for this, but you could match this to your army theme or to match your other terrain if you like. I applied small, almost graffiti-like random shapes with rough edges. You don't want rounded blobs here, as rust in reality would eat away randomly, leaving jagged edges of paint. We're going to do this all over the model to add to the extremely rusty appearance of this piece, but you could do more or less remaining paint depending on the look you're going for. Now we're going to tie these colours together a little more with an all-over wash of Agrax Earthshade from Games Workshop. We're going to apply this all over the model, but not too heavily, as we don't want it to pool in the recesses too much. This darkens it all down and blends the colours together. Next, a bit of a different technique, and that's paint splatter. We're going to use Troll Slayer Orange from Games Workshop for this. You want the paint to be wet so it splatters better, so take an old brush you don't mind bending the bristles on and thin down the paint with a bit of water. Then take the brush in your fist so your thumb can flick the bristles at the model. This will give you orange splatter that looks like fresh rust spots. You can do this as much or as little as you like, depending on the look you're going for. If you're struggling to get good splatter from your brushes, you could always use an old toothbrush. Now we're going to add some oil leaks. You can use various colours for this. I chose to use Agrax Earthshade again, but you can use Nuln Oil for a similar effect. Using the gloss shades from Games Workshop or mixing a little gloss varnish into your chosen colour will give a wetter, oily look, but I wanted mine to look more like leftover streaks where leaks had been, rather than fresh liquid running down. But you can take your pick here. What I'm doing here is applying the shade where a leak may have started, pooled a little on a horizontal surface, and then drawing it down vertically where the liquid might have run down. Your model might have natural recesses where this would obviously have happened, but on mine I just picked some random areas where it might have dripped. Another detail we could add is verdigris weathering. That's specifically the turquoise coloured weathering you typically get on copper, but the colour contrasts well with the orange tones we've been using. You can of course skip this step if you're not fond of it, but I think it's a welcome splash of colour on an otherwise quite dingy looking model now. Using Games Workshop's Nihilak Oxide, say that 3 times fast, often less is more here, so I'm going to limit its use to the leaks coming from the tops of the pipes. I'm using the same technique as I did for the oil streaks, and that's to draw it down and occasionally horizontally where it might have pooled a little before dripping down some more. I decided the top of the tanks was going to be slimy at this point, so they needed a green base colour. I picked Games Workshop's Cabalite Green for this, as it's a strong colour that goes well with the Nurgle's Rot technical paint I'll be using later. This also is down to taste, so you can skip this if you don't plan on your model looking too nurgly. You could perhaps use orange and red to simulate heat inside the refinery, or perhaps black with some stippled black around the edges like soot from a chimney. The choice is yours. Moving on to the remaining bits of the model, I decided to do them in a similar way to how Games Workshop suggests doing rust. I started by base coating all the remaining parts of the model with lead belcher. I thinned it down with some water before applying just one thin coat. I also applied this to the top grills on the tanks. Now we're going to use the Games Workshop technical paint, Typhus Corrosion. We're going to paint this all over the lead belcher we've just done, but be sure to give the paint a really good mix often, as it has little texture beads in it, which will really help when it comes to dry brushing in the next step. Shake the pot frequently, don't forget. Try to be neat when painting here, as it's a dark paint and will cover everything else it touches quite noticeably. Nearing the end now, we're going to use Riser Rust, which is a dry brush paint that was made to go along with Typhus Corrosion. Get a tiny bit on the tip of your brush and then brush most of it off on a piece of paper. We want the tiniest bit left here. Drag the brush lightly back and forth over the areas we painted in Typhus Corrosion, and this leaves a rusty orange effect on the raised edges and corners of the model. You can do this as heavy or light as you like, but I think less is more when dry brushing, as it's easy to do too much and it's difficult to remove afterwards without repainting, so best be subtle here. The gritty substance in the Typhus Corrosion picks up the dry brush nicely, adding to the rusty effect. Here I added a few extra verdigris drips as before, but this time to the darker areas we've just painted. Again, you can leave this if you don't like it, I won't be offended much. And lastly, we're going to add some Nurgle's Rot technical paint, or simply snot as I call it. All we do here is get a decent amount on the brush and slap it on the areas you want to be all gooey. This goes great on Death Guard tentacles and demon bits, or oozing out of gun barrels and the like, or you could use it for toxic waste pipe terrain pieces. The reason we applied a green base coat for this is because the paint contracts slightly as it dries, and this can expose the underlying colours. And there we have it, a few techniques. You can pick and choose which ones to apply to your models to make them look horrible. Thanks for watching, please leave a like and subscribe for more content, and as usual I have some affiliate links down below. These really help support me doing this full time at no extra cost to yourself. Until next time, bye bye.